How do we keep Judaism alive? How do we keep Judaism relevant? How do we keep Judaism applicable? How do we keep Judaism ethical and moral, right? And thank God, literally, that we have a blueprint in the Talmud to show us how to do that, what the Talmudic process is, right? And so that's something that just is a lifetime education of understanding the Talmudic process, of deciphering truth, of handling conversation, controversy, right? And the Talmud is just an amazing blueprint and artistic codification of very difficult conversations and how to manage them. And sometimes, actually most of the time, the Talmud itself is inconclusive, meaning it records these conversations in order for us to draw from them, in order for us to draw wisdom from them, in order for us to draw inspiration and guidance from the conversations. And so it's very careful to record and honor diverse opinions, right? The opposition, right? The Hillel and Beit Shammai, right, are both the words of the living Torah. That's Rabbinic Judaism. The ability to handle dispute, the ability to handle debate, right? It's the intellectual exercise of debate is codified in the Talmud, right? The intellectual exercise of struggling in the courtroom, in our academy, in the halls of the academy, are recorded in the Talmud. The Jewish way of dialogue is recorded in the Talmud. And so for all these reasons and more, the Talmud just becomes this source of study and wonder and memorization and learning for the Jewish people, right? And let's take one more look at a story in the Talmud that comments on itself, right? It's a self-reflective story that's found in the Talmud. And it's a famous story. It's called "It is not in heaven." So that's a quote. "It's not in heaven." Lo b'shamayim hi is a quote from the Bible. It's a quote from the Torah in Deuteronomy. And what it means in context of Deuteronomy is Lo b'shamayim hi, right? The Torah isn't too far away from you. The Torah is close. The Torah should be proximate and intimate and close by. Lo b'shamayim hi, it shouldn't be in the heavens. It should be in the earth. It should be on earth. It shouldn't be in heaven. Right? So that's the original quote of Lo b'shamayim hi. The original context is it is not in heaven, that it is on earth for you to use as a precious legacy and gift to you. Anyway, so that's the original context, and it gets one common strategy that our rabbis use is decontextualizing the Torah and other texts, and taking out snippets to use as launching points for other conversations, for rabbinic Jewish conversations. And so this is a good example of that. It takes a snippet of the Torah text out of context and recontextualizes it in a rabbinic landscape. Here it is. An oven was constructed out of layers of clay with sand in between the layers. So it's a special kind of oven, right? And it's a lot of Talmud is case law, right? And so it comes out of a specific case. An oven was constructed out of layers of clay, right? So a weird oven that wasn't sure if you could make it kosher after something was impure, or if you could make it impure if something was already pure. There are questions about the purity status, about the status of purity and impurity, which was a big deal back in the day, of this oven. Rabbi Eliezer says that this oven is pure. The sages say it's impure. So there's a conflict, a controversy, a debate, which is 90% of the Talmud is framed as conversations, as opinions, as all right, let's see who's right, who's wrong, what we can learn from this one, what we should learn from that one. Let's see. Rabbi Eliezer says it's pure. The sages say it's impure. So the majority, which is the sages, is impure, and the minority opinion, actually it's a solo opinion, is Rabbi Eliezer says it's pure. So what do we do? How do we move on? Right? Typically, in a democracy, right, as I mentioned, Rabbinic Judaism is a democracy, and true to democracy, if we have a disagreement in the academy, how do we rule? How do we decide which way to go? Majority rules, right? It's in the Torah. Right? It says, "Acharei rabim lahatot," majority rules. So much like the democratic process, it seems like it's heading in that direction, that it's going to end up impure because the sages are the majority. However, the minority wouldn't comply. The minority said, Rabbi Eliezer brought every argument under the sun, but they wouldn't accept it. He just kept going and going and going. Basically filibuster, right? He just kept this. Rabbi Eliezer said, the law goes according to me, and the carob tree will prove it. And
why the carob?
What's that?
Why the carob tree?
A miracle. He just wanted to perform a miracle. He's saying, the carob tree will prove it. And the carob tree uprooted and moved 100 yards. A tree jumped out of the ground and replanted itself 100 yards away. This is what happened in it's a Talmud story, right? So go with it for now. And so he said, look, God said I'm right, right? Like I'm right. And the sages say, no, we don't accept proof from the trees. That's what Charles said, right? Charles and the sages say, no, we don't accept proof from the trees. The law goes according to me, and the river will prove it. And the river stopped and then went in reverse and went the other way. And the sages say, no, we don't accept proof from water. Third time. And so it's a story, right? Because there's three of them. Yeah? And the law, the house of study will prove it. The walls of the house of study started to collapse. And Rabbi Joshua, a different sage, who was a very holy and old sage, yelled at the walls and said, walls, if sages are disputing during a point of law, what business is it of yours? Like, walls, stay out of this. And the walls stopped collapsing in out of respect for Rabbi Joshua, but they didn't straighten either out of respect for Rabbi Eliezer, because apparently Rabbi Eliezer was right. Even though he was a minority, seems like he was right. At least the miracles seem to indicate that. Finally, Rabbi Eliezer had enough and said, if the law goes for me, heaven will prove it. A divine voice from heaven came out and says, what are you arguing about? The law goes according to Rabbi Eliezer on all matters, right? There's a voice of God that came out and said, Rabbi Eliezer is correct. And Rabbi Joshua got up, right? Who was the most respected elder in the room and said, it is not in heaven, right? And so he uses this phrase from Deuteronomy out of context. And instead of saying it's not in heaven, it's here on earth, it's like, it means it's not in heaven. The deciding vote is not in heaven. God, you don't get to decide, what pot is treif and what pot is kosher and what part is milchik and part is, that's our business. That's Rabbinic Judaism, right? We no longer go to the holy temple and seek God's voice. We have to battle it out in the academy. We have to figure things out for ourselves. Thank you very much, Rabbi Joshua said, but we don't need to hear from God today because this is a rabbi decision. Right, and Rabbi Yirmiyah explains, right, that what Joshua said, which was the Torah was already given at Mount Sinai. You gave us the Torah, God. From that point on, we don't rule according to divine voices. When we have a problem, we don't pray and hear the answer. Right? We have to figure it out for ourselves. Right, as it says, after the majority, you should incline. You gave us the Torah. You gave us a process. We don't go to heaven anymore about these decisions. And sometime later, Rabbi Nathan met Elijah the prophet. Right? So Elijah the prophet is a character, a figure, who Eliyahu Hanavi, who kind of floats in and floats out at our Passover seders. And Saturday night at Havdalah, he floats in and floats around. He's sort of half here and half in heaven. And Rabbi Nathan asks Elijah the prophet, what was God doing during this whole thing? You want to know what was God doing while the rabbis were cutting God off from having a voice in this discussion. And Elijah the prophet said God was actually kind of enjoying it. The Holy One was laughing and saying, "My children have defeated me. My children have defeated me. Look at this. My children are all grown up. They have the Torah. They know what they're doing. They're old enough to work things out on their own. And how beautiful is that? My own children have grown up and defeated me." Right? And so that's what God had to say when Rabbinic Judaism, this is the Gemara talking, right? So that's what God had to say when Rabbinic Judaism took over from Temple Judaism. When Rabbinic Judaism took over from the voice of the prophet. When Rabbinic Judaism took over from Aaron the high priest and right, Isaiah having prophetic seizures. Right? We don't do that anymore. We do Rabbinic Judaism, which is logical and sensical and rational. Yes, it can get emotional, but we can work it out. All right, even though it's difficult and challenging to be on our own, we're up for the task. All right, says Rabbinic Judaism. Yeah, Charles. Yeah.
How does the Kabbalah fit into this scheme?
How does what?
The Kabbalah.
Kabbalah. Good. 1 second. Good question. Yeah, good. So that's the good. So let me just finish the Talmud, and then we'll kind of contextualize Kabbalah. All right. So early on in the first, let's do this. All right. Early on in the first class, we talked Tanakh and Bible, right? The Torah and the prophets and the writings, right? And the commentary on that. Today, we really embraced and learned a little bit about the other tradition, which is the oral tradition. That was the written tradition. This is the oral tradition, which began with the Mishnah, continued on through the beautiful, sort of sophisticated, complex Talmudic discourse, which includes legal discourse and what we just read, which is fable, right, and lore. They call it agadah, which means lore. So the Talmud is filled with law and lore, right? And they mix in interesting and creative artistic ways. Meaning, right, after a particularly even-handed legal discourse, right? Meaning it results in a tie. They're arguing about, when you say the Shema, do you need to have intentionality or do you not need to have intentionality? Right? Can it be a rote recitation or does it have to have intentionality? And it's a long conversation in the Talmud that never really gets resolved, right? It sort of leaves it open for the ages, right? For communities to use and process, and it role models a process for us to go through. How important is it? What factors are there? What if you do it? And gives us a sense of how they reasoned, and gives us those tools of reasoning for us to figure out how to live Jewish in an ideal way. And so that's the Talmud, and it gives us that gift. So we've got the written law, and we've got the oral tradition, and then we also have a mystical tradition, right, that Charles is asking about. Where does that come from, right? And the versioning of that kind of Kabbalistic mystical was Spain and then Sfat in the 1600s, 1500, earlier, a little earlier, and that was about the need to have. So you can hear, right? So I described Talmudic Judaism as intellectual and reasoned and rational, and in the human consciousness, right, there are times when we need more than that, when we need a more immediate spiritual, emotional connection with God. And the communities at the time needed it, right? They needed this more intense, emotional, spiritual experience. And that's what Kabbalah provides. It rounds out those different ways of connecting with God, right? And we have, right, Rabbinic Judaism, I think, can get criticized as particularly intellectual and doesn't pay enough regard to the emotional. One can criticize, I think, Judaism for being overly legal, right? And the Christians did that quite well. You're busy with your how many nuts you need on your tzitzis, when meanwhile people are starving, right? So Rabbinic Judaism is open to that criticism of being overly legal and not without enough heart, and mysticism covers that ground of connecting to the heart and just walking the earth with open eyes, open heart, open to the divine flow that's all around us. So that's I think the intellectual nature of Rabbinic Judaism gave birth to a spiritual explosion.
Yeah. Is Tzfat a center for Kabbalah after, like currently? Because in the beginning, Isaac Luria, for example, is buried there, but they started in Spain and in France.
Right.
Yeah. But when did Tzfat become such a...
The Ari, the Ari, the great Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, came to Tzfat and really brought a sense of a divine miracle, with him, and a supernatural connection. So really in Tzfat, I think in the 1400s, 1500s, I think it's when it really. And people also mention, by the way, there are scholars who mention the proliferation of caffeine around that time also. I'm not sure that's true or not, but they said it's maybe all that energy and caffeine gave people were stayed up all night, and enabled some of these experiences. So good. So that's our Talmudic section. I have a deep love for Talmud, and I think the need for Talmud and the Talmudic way of discourse is really important for us today, right? As we grapple with political partisanship and polarization, and the inability to even have a discourse with people, right? And the Talmud has this very elaborate, sophisticated rules of debate and discourse that demand honoring the opposition and understanding their argument and dealing with a conversation on a very deep level, to train our minds, I think, to think through issues in appropriate ways, and not to open our minds to the opposition. So in order to sharpen our own understandings, and because I think at the heart of democracy, and which is at the core of Rabbinic Judaism, right, is valuing a complete experience is a diverse experience. A complete experience is not uniform. A complete experience is diverse, right? The rainbow, right, is the complete experience, right? White light is made up of all kinds of light, right? And the same is true with the Talmud. It's not monolithic. It's not linear. It's beautiful and raucous and multifaceted, and gives deep honor. In fact, right, Hillel and Shammai, right? So the story goes, Hillel and Shammai were two debate partners, and we always go according to Hillel, right? Even though it's not clear in the Talmud who wins all the time. When we practice Judaism according to the policies and laws of Hillel. The question is why? And the answer is because Hillel, when they used to teach an argument, teach an issue, they would first explain the opposition opinion and make that totally clear. Then they would explain their own position. So they would give the biggest honor to the opposition. And then once you fully understood the opposition, then they would teach you what they believe. And so for that reason, we always go according to them because they had the fullest appreciation for the whole picture. And so maybe walk in their footsteps, right, of understanding that even our forefathers in America, our ancestors in America, understood the deep biblical and holy significance of democracy and equality that's based in this idea that we have to find a way to get along with other in order to move forward. So we need that wisdom now more than ever.
You are totally right to bring this in because in our current situation, contemporary world, this is disappearing.
It's very
It is too
ability
bad.
to debate, right? To debate in a calm, rational way.
Yeah, that's very, very important to bring in the discussion. Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, and so that's your introduction to the Talmud, and we look forward to meeting again next session.
Thank
All
you
right.
very much.
Have a great day.
Great session today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I know. I do wish it was more interactive. I kind of apologize for that, but I also think, right, we're limited in this technology platform. So I appreciate you. I look forward to, learning from you.
Super.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.